Hello, everybody. I'd like for you guys to just take a moment and look around the room amongst each other and ask yourself, who here are you drawn to? Who looks interesting, inviting, attractive, hot? And who here might I be drawn to and wish to take back to my secret lair and ravage tonight? It is a beautiful gift, this skill of scouring a room to perfect the art of finding a mate, whether it's for tonight, a weekend fling, or for life. Eroticism is an infinite continuum of every experience and every emotion. It shapes the essence of who we are and what we're drawn to. It expands beyond mere sex and into food, into music, art, literature, and even, yes, technology. I'd like for you all to imagine that you are a cliff by the sea. Every day, the wind and the waves, the weather, it shapes your cliff. This is how our experiences shape our eroticism over the course of our lifetimes. Sorry, my tongue is tangled. But we have something the cliffs don't have, and that is a brain. I've spent the majority of my life studying human desire, love, relationships, and sex, and of course, putting it very much to practice and to test. Human beings are hardwired for connection, belonging, and pair bonding. But pair bonding in the way the brain is hardwired and in the way we behave doesn't necessarily prescribe or require sexual exclusivity. In fact, monogamy is actually a decision we make to make life less complicated. It is not a natural state. Neurologists and anthropologists, specifically the work of Dr. Helen Fisher, have shown that the brain has evolved 3 separate systems for mating and reproduction. First, the sex drive. Second, the romantic drive. And third, the drive for deep cosmic attachment with a long-term partner. Together, these 3 systems, with many other parts of the brain, orchestrate our sexual, romantic, and family lives. But they reside way below the cortex, way below the limbic system where we generate and feel emotions. They dwell in the most primitive parts of the brain, linked with energy, focus, craving, motivation, and drive. In this case, the drive to win life's greatest prize, a mating partner. They evolved over 4.4 million years ago in our first ancestors, and technology, much less sex robots, are not going to change that. But that's not to say Sextech and maybe even sex robots are not awesome or not needed in the world. When most people think of Sextech, they think of vibrators or VR porn. But let's look at some of history's best inventions in sex tech. Fire, for sure, had to be one of the first, enabling a nice warm ambiance for us to cuddle up and get frisky. Then, of course, in 1844, Charles Goodyear patented vulcanized rubber. In 1855, we had the first rubber condom, and by the late 1850s, we had mass production of rubbers. Fast forward even later, and the birth control pill comes out, and suddenly there's a mass hysteria in society because these brazen women can screw whoever they want without consequence. The same hysteria happened when porn went mainstream on the internet. I was at Yale Sex Week a few years ago, and I witnessed Gail Dines tell a group of students that if their partners watch porn, then they are therefore cheating on them. That must make me a serial cheater. Sex tech can be defined as any technology that advances our romantic and sexual lives. It's an industry estimated to be $30 billion by the year 2020. This could be anything from a period tracker app like Clue, the Kegel muscle trainer like Elvie, shout out to Elvie because I know they're here at TOA. It includes dating apps, teledildonics, which is such a fun word to say, haptic technology, VR expanding from just porn but into erotic playgrounds with hologram technology, and VR even expanding into sex ed. There's been an uptick in toys designed for couples. They're very sleek and elegant. One of my favorites is the Mocha Wreath that is sold by Amourly. Shout out to them. We no longer need a value pack of batteries to play with our toys. Now, seeing the beginning of phases of AI and biometrics, we're seeing new toys designed that can react to our body temperature, our pulse rate. They can expand inside of us. And there's even an interesting development out of Australia called the Exo Lover. It bills itself as an ecosystem for the global sexual interaction on the blockchain. I lost my virginity to a dude I met on AOL. We sure have come a long way. Print ads, the printing press was a form of technology that we then used to place ads in magazines and papers to meet people. Phone hookup hotlines from the 80s and 90s, battery-operated toys, and now we can spend hours surfing endless categories of porn, swiping left and right, presenting ourselves in some part to attract a mate. But as we spend our time creating stories, updating statuses, and swiping away, are we going down a rabbit hole of digital technology? And is it diminishing our erotic intelligence? Not that digital technology is bad, but perhaps it's possible we're not being conscious of the way we consume it. Amidst our collective loneliness and ennui, we turn to our phones for the next hit of stimulation and engagement. We've now commodified ourselves into personal brands, thereby commodifying each other. Naturally, this commodification leads to a constant comparison loop. We may have thousands of digital connections and followers online, but we're lonelier than ever. Depression and suicide rates are soaring, and millennials report higher rates of depression than any other generation before. And now they're the largest sector in the workplace. According to a report by the Mental Health Association, $51 billion in absenteeism and lost productivity and $26 billion in direct treatment costs affects the US economy. Indeed, comparison in the age of perfectionism is hard on the human spirit. And then there's the paradox of choice. We have all of these options of people to choose from on apps, but the paradox of choice states that between 5 and 9 choices, our brains experience this sort of shutdown of cognitive dissonance. So we just don't really want to choose anybody, or we're unsure or unhappy with the choices that we do make. Add to that the angst of perfecting a social media presence, and we're quite literally living in the age of narcissistic captivity. So obsessed with the image we put forth for others to see, we probably sometimes spend more time on crafting the perfect post than we do in self-reflection. But I get it. The intent behind living in the age of narcissistic captivity isn't all bad. We all just want to be loved and liked and desired. It's not really our fault. We're hardwired that way, remember? In a recent New York Magazine article, Allison Davis writes about Henry, the first male sex robot. And I quote, "Online dating already has me thinking of mating as something like online shopping. Have we really reduced each other and therefore ourselves to barcodes? Where does this leave us when sex robots become mainstream and affordable?" As with any new technology, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. Quite likely, we'll see a coming out party of a new sexual identity called the technosexual. Couples who would like to have threesomes but feel rather threatened by an actual person might engage in threesomes with their sex bots. We might even see sex bot orgies, a real heavy metal party. Makers claim that these sex bots will reduce the incidence of STIs, sex crimes, violence against women. They also market them as therapeutic. Some claim bots will revolutionize sex work, and indeed, there are already sex doll brothels in London, Barcelona, and Moscow. Perhaps the majority of women who fuck men will finally learn how to have penetrative orgasms from penetrative sex alone without having to stimulate their clitoris. They won't have to worry about the pimple on their ass or if they shave today or catering to the male ego. And I say catering to the male ego because 80% of women report that they do not orgasm from penetrative sex alone. And yet 99%... And yet 99% of all guys I talk to claim they make their partners come every single time. Indeed, the cultural conditioning of women to stay soft, not speak up, keep the peace, and of course make her partner feel like he's the biggest Don Juan to ever live, has led to trillions of faked orgasms. And maybe guys watching porn videos of how women make themselves come on these sex bots will be the teaching porn we need to help them realize that this jackhammer style we often see just isn't doing the trick. Perhaps sex bots could be the pleasure equality revolution humanity needs to close the orgasm gap amongst the heteros. Or maybe for some, it could drive us further into isolation. It is easier, after all, to hide behind screens and connect with a robot than to face rejection, embarrassment, performance anxiety, or failure. Sex robots are in the headlines every day. I have Google News alerts on them, so I see all of the news that's happening. And humans really love exploring new possibilities, novelty, and Westworld. But we're a long way off from AI that can even mimic Westworld. Producers of these bots claim that they will cure loneliness, but loneliness is not the absence of companionship. Loneliness is the absence of purpose and meaning in your life. These robots will not cure loneliness, they'll just provide a momentary distraction from our loneliness. In fact, a study published just 2 weeks ago in the British Medical Journal of Sexual and Reproductive Health reminds us that most of these makers are just making claims and there's no empirical data to prove any of it. They warn it could worsen loneliness, cause severe emotional distress by fostering false intimacy, and perhaps even promote further unrealistic beauty standards along with the objectification of women. But I suppose that could go in reverse because women could now have a bot with a 12-inch dick versus the average male size, which is 5.1 inches. And I feel your pain. I don't have sex robot titties. I have very tiny ones. So we're all just human here. And let's touch on desire, which brings us back to eroticism. The erotic equation is attraction plus obstacles equals excitement. That's why affairs are so hot. It's also why most adults are adulterous. Sex with a robot it gives you near certainty. Some people are talking about programming them so that we would have to teach people consent, but I would say that would be just a game, like when we have to ask Siri the same question 6 times to get the answer we want. It's not a real challenge. It's not a real dance. One definition I use for eroticism is the interplay of desire and arousal with the daily challenges of living and loving. Challenges drive us, and they are imperative to human development. And how can you want something that you already have? That's sort of the conundrum of long-term relationships, right? The thrill of the chase is over, all threats are negated, we're in our lovey-dovey worlds, and boom, the fire dwindles and we aren't having sex, especially if we don't have erotic intelligence. We get bored with our partners, so why wouldn't we get bored with a robot? How many new techie toys do we buy because they're the cool new thing and they wind up in a closet or a drawer? Desire requires mystery and the unknown, diving into discomfort of potentially new and sometimes devastating emotions. And to truly feel desired requires another desiring conscience who can conceive me as a desiring being. The other thing I find interesting is how fully customizable they are. One maker of dolls has over 50 different nipple types. Hello, paradox of choice. The fun, beauty, and excitement of undressing another for the first time is a moment of discovery. In that moment, lying there naked with another, you are in a moment of being accepted, being seen, being desired, and even if you're not going to run away into the sunset together, it's still a moment of validation, affirmation, and feeling alive. Beyond orgasms and entertainment, the robots will surely provide. We forget the purpose of human relationships, even hookups, are to propel us to evolve. Sex and human interaction is a vehicle for personal growth. Sure, AI can maybe do that mildly, but no way near the way another human hookup can teach us what we don't want, can get under our skin, drive us crazy, and propel us. Millennials aren't hooking up because they don't want to get the feels and they're focused on their careers. And P.S., I'm like one of the oldest millennials and I'm not in that camp. But in avoiding the exploration of relationships, we forget that human relationships are an imperative compass to exploring who we are. We diminish our capacity to finely tune the art of selection, of finding and winning a mate, one is provocatively compatible who propels us to be even better than we could imagine, bestowing upon us the most meaningful, purposeful experience life can offer, love. So where do we go from here? As we usher in this new age of sex technology, it's imperative to cultivate erotic intelligence. I define it with 5 main pillars: body attunement, self-awareness, creative imagination, social and emotional intelligence. Thus far, sex tech has enabled much higher capabilities of body attunement. I hope tech will further help us understand our physiological response. 2, self-awareness. Not something you wake up with every day, but you're constantly tuning it in the present moment with every experience. I have an app called the Hormone Horoscope, and it tells me, hey girl, you've got plunging estrogen levels, you need to eat some peanuts, and you're gonna be cranky. That is surely helpful. Creative imagination. Can you see the same city, job, person with a new lens regularly? And while we're on creative imagination, I want to quickly touch on porn. If not for mainstream porn, we may not have learned about bukkake and cuckolding, but if we're not conscientious of how we use porn, it can kill our erotic imagination. We've seen what eating McDonald's every day does, especially if we've seen that movie Super Size Me. Fast food and TV dinners were once the future of food and food tech, but then we had a diabetes and obesity epidemic. We backpedaled, we've had a return to slow cooking and farm to table, and in the same way, we need to make sure we're not spoon-feeding our erotic imagination the equivalent of McDonald's. I watch porn all the time, but it's important to masturbate to your own home-cooked meal and be conscientious of the porn you consume the way you are with the food you consume. Social intelligence. We are losing the art of conversation, picking up on subtle cues in body language and nuances, and preempting the needs of another because our heads are buried in screens all day. Is it any wonder we need affirmative consent? Emotional intelligence. It's imperative to a happy and fulfilling life. How do you handle rejection, shame, fear, guilt, failure? What do you say to your partner when you lose an erection in the middle of sex, don't orgasm, or you queef? How do you handle imperfections? It's a sign of how you might handle them in yourself. The brave new world that I dream of is not a dystopian world of sex robots, but one where humans are courageous. It is one where deep connection requires vulnerability, hope requires struggle, fulfillment is the courage to live our truths, and often I say erotic intelligence is the ability to hold 2 simultaneous truths. To love and truly be loved requires imperfection. Remember those 3 brain systems, they aren't going anywhere. And with that, I'd just like to ask you, even though my time is up, I'd like to leave you with this, because sex tech begs this last question of all of us. What does sex mean to you? Is it something you do, something you need, like eating, like just to get off, or is it a journey you go on? Is it something you get? Is it something you give up, or is it something you share? What place do you want sex to have in your life? Thank you. Yeah.
We're going to make time for 2 questions real quick. And I just lost my questions. Okay. One is basically, especially as we get more AI-centered and robot-centered and everything else like that, is how do we actually still build meaningful connections or relationships?
Go out, talk to people, come to TOA and meet a bunch of people and network.
All right. Another question is, how could tech help us better understand our physiological response?
Yeah, that's great. So there are 2 researchers in Canada, and they had a bunch of women self-report on when they were aroused, and they found that by specific images, and they found that the women would report that they were getting turned on with what you would assume they would get turned on by seeing, but then it would show other images and the women would say, I'm not being turned on, but their pulse rate and their body temperature and their genitals told the researchers otherwise. So I think that's quite interesting how we have so many years of conditioning to overcome to just admit to the fact that, yeah, that turns me on.
Very good point. All right, that's all the time we have questions, but she will be having an AMA at 2:15 today in the Stuba. So if you have more questions, by all means, please ask. And everyone give a big warm hand clap.